Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag with a theme. It is the long-awaited Andy Murray mailbag. In honor of his retirement, it is essentially nothing but Andy Murray talk for about an hour. And for this special episode, I wanted to enlist some help. A man who coached Andy Murray in the very early years, a man who has covered and commentated Andy's matches and just generally speaking, watched him very closely for a long time. He is one of my favorite tennis minds out there. He is Mark Petchey. So Petchey will join me for this chat. We are powered by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. It is actually a pretty fun week on the tour. You have in Beijing, Alcaraz, Sinner, Medvedev, all in the same ATP 500 draw. That's exciting. Women's side, it's actually a 1,000 for the WTA. You have Arina Sabalenka trying to keep things going after her U.S. Open title. Jessica Pegula is in there after a big summer. Coco Gauff with a new coach. Zheng Qinwen playing at home. Lots of good stuff in Beijing. Tokyo, not bad either. Currently, you can go to betus.com and use the promo code YouTube150 for an 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. Without further ado, the Andy Murray mailbag with Mark Petchey. We're joined once again by Mark Petchey, the outstanding tennis commentator who you know very well, former coach of Andy Murray. So pleased to have him join me for a mailbag episode that I've wanted to do a very long time, really since Murray retired, when this idea first hatched into my mind. We've taken just Murray comments and we are going to work through them together. So Petch, thanks for coming on Monday Match Analysis again.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
All right, so before we get to the viewer comments, I got to get my own question in. You joined Murray, you began coaching Murray, I should say, when he was 351 in the world. You got him inside the top 50, and then you guys parted ways. I look at Andy's career, and one of the things that's very natural to do is compare him to some of the members of the big three. He had way more coaches. There is no Nadal, Uncle Tony. There is no Djokovic, Marian Vida. I counted 12 coaches in his career. I may have undercounted. In terms of his approach to coaching, why do you think it played out that way, that he wanted so many different voices throughout his career? What was it about Andy and the way he went about things?
Oh, okay, you got in with the big question at the start. I thought usually when you do interviews, you do like a nice little couple of jabs. Hey, welcome. How was your breakfast? Did you have a good coffee? And then you come in with the big one that you want the answer for, but you've gone in hard early. Listen, I think it's a great question. I think there's many answers to it as well, actually. I mean, I would love to say that this was like a one size fits all sort of a binary answer, but it's actually super complicated. There's many parts to it. Obviously, the injury at the back end of his career was one thing. So that obviously he was searching for an awful lot of solutions to those issues to try and get himself back to the top of the game. He was digging deeper than I've ever seen anyone dig into data to try and figure out some solutions to kind of shortcut and help him overcome the issues that he had with his hip. And Andy had a very strong sense of who he is and how he wanted to play. And I think that people also need to sort of recognize that. You can see with your eyes as a coach where you think they need to get to, but obviously they are the ones in the arena that are trying to make it happen. And obviously from Andy's point of view, he had some different directions to take at the early part of his career. He could have taken the kind of decision to be a far more attacking player. And, you know, Gil, I think it's fair to say, I think if Andy was being honest, at 18, he didn't love training. He didn't love the physical side of things. He did it. He never shied away from it, but he didn't love it. But actually, he taught himself to love physical training. And the main reason that he taught himself to love physical training was it means he didn't have to adjust his style, because he could then play the way that he believed was going to make him the most successful player from the back of the court. So that decision was a very conscious decision from Andy. Was I can go one or two ways here. And I'm actually going to teach myself to love working my absolute ass off, because it is going to allow me to play the way that I internally believe is the right way to play. And as a coach, you can only kind of germinate an idea, or hope to germinate an idea. You can plant that seed. You can talk about it as much as you like. You can talk about it from different angles. But if you don't have a perfect metric, which is literally black and white about why you should change something, it's very hard to make a great player of which he was already as a teenager change too dramatically. Um, and so Andy stayed true to who he was. And I think the reason that he had more coaches ultimately, not that Roger didn't have a lot of coaches,
Roger
Severin
did.
was that
Yeah.
Roger had Severin, who was kind of the constant, and Andy, you can argue, had Danny for a while, he had Jamie for a while as the constants, and then in came Ivan and other people. Brad obviously did a great job. So I think that was the main reason, that he wanted to stay true to his style, but he was looking for that 2% difference that was going to bring him the success that he was looking for.
Okay, just to tie a bow on that, and it's a great answer. On a personal level, I don't know if it was you or Andy who went on the record and said we had disagreements about the tennis, just the tennis. Have you ever publicly said what the disagreement was specifically?
Uh, I mean, I think it is, isn't it? I don't think it's not in the public domain. I mean, listen, Andy was paying me to give my opinion. I was
Mm-hmm.
very fortunate as a coach, and I've been fortunate as a coach in every single player that I've worked with, that I've always had another job to go to if it doesn't work out. Very few tennis coaches on the tour, unless they've already made it and they're financially bulletproof, have that luxury. You're always, if you get fired, looking for another job on the tour. So, you've got to get on with everyone. You've got to be nice to all the agents. You've got to you don't have that luxury to be, as clear as you want to be. And I was very crystal clear to Andy, that as he went up the rankings, it is an entrance to a bigger problem. It's you've solved one of your problems, which is to make a career out of tennis. The second issue you have, when you're as determined, you're as talented as Andy is, and as ambitious, is that you want to win majors. That's the bottom line. So what? It's one thing to get to the top 50, and then it's another thing to say, well, actually, I want to win these big events, and how am I going to do that? And he was lucky and unlucky in the fact that he was in an era where it was very apparent to not just me, but everybody, that there were three other guys out there that were unbelievably good. And for him to beat those over 5 sets, which is again a massive difference than three. And I think that times we don't make that distinction as much. We talk a lot about the physical, but it's more about actually the tennis. It's all about the shot making. It's the ability to win points over 5 sets, not just the ability to be able to last a marathon from a running point of view. You've actually got to hit more winners or make them miss more. The strategic elements of a 5 set match are just on a whole different scale to a best of three. And my attitude at that stage, in that opening period of sort of January, February, and March of that year, was, you're going to make a career, and a very successful one, without me. But you've employed me to tell you what I think you should do to be able to beat potentially Roger, then Rafa, or Novak. And of course, we've got to throw Stan in the mix at that particular time, although his time obviously came a bit later, to win these events over 5 sets. They're going to get to the semis. They're then going to feel as confident as you do at that stage, because they've already put 5 matches in the bank. And how do you get from the first round, the back office of a major, to the front office of a major in the most effective, efficient, and hopefully, energy efficient way? Because you're going to need potentially to play 10 sets against some of the best players that ever picked up a tennis racket. And my attitude was that we needed to figure out a way to make his forehand better. As good as a backhand can be, it's never going to win you a major, in my opinion. And I can be
Hmm.
wrong, and I have been wrong. And and they were the discussion. I don't want to say it was a disagreement, but it was definitely a discussion that at that stage when somebody is trying to make that push, I probably didn't want to hear. And I'll take some of the blame. I'd coached on the tour for 2 years with Sylvia Talaya, Tina Pisnik back in the early 20s, and it was a great time. Sylvia went from 90 to top 20, and Tina went from 150 to 50. But I hadn't necessarily worked with somebody that was looking like they were going to win a major, and I was probably a little too quick. I probably should have allowed him to develop another 6 to 12 months, winning matches, getting closer to the top 10 on his own before maybe trying to say to him, this is what I feel needs to happen at that stage, because he's still at that stage trying to some degree, wonder whether he's going to be in that mixed skill. And I know this is a long-winded answer, but that when I look back on my performance as a coach in that situation, I wonder whether I should have given him more time just to figure it out on his own, because he's so super smart that maybe we both could have got to where we needed to get to together if I'd have given him a little bit more time. But my attitude was, you're paying me, money to tell you to tell you how I think you can win these, and
Right.
time is of the essence at that stage, because it takes time to develop that skill set, that recognition of opportunities on short balls, and all of those things. So there's no blame in one particular area. Things could have been different from my side.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, my goal is just to gain insight about Andy from that. And I'm sure a lot of the themes that have come up just in me asking that initial question are sure to come up again. The difference between Andy and the big three, the the effort or lack of effort in terms of taking on extra risk and building the forehand into a heavyweight weapon, which was maybe never a huge desire. And then, the other things that he did so well that he was able to have so much success playing his way, doing things his way. And we'll get into all that. So let's get into the first comment from a viewer. I thought this one was very interesting. Uh, Hi, Gill. It comes from Tiger. Seeing as this mailbag is about Murray, I wanted to ask you about sliding on hard court. It seems that in the last 10 years, almost every player has started sliding on hard court to defend. Even Federer started doing it. And this is perhaps best utilized by Sinner, who gets a very high quality of shot while sliding. But Murray doesn't slide on hard court while he is one of the best defenders of all time, which makes me question how useful sliding on hard court really is. Would you say sliding on hard court is useful? And if it is, how was Murray able to still be an elite defender without it? So, Petch, this is a very, typical Monday Match Analysis fan technical question about sliding on hard court. Where do you stand on this in relation to Murray?
I think Tiger should come and work for Tennis Channel. Wow. Uh, he's gone deep there, gone very granular. Listen, Andy tried to slide, he couldn't. And I think there's a number of players out there that can't. It just, you either grow up and you kind of have that ability. He also had the issues with the ankle. He obviously hurt it very early on in his career at Queen's. And he had to manage that with the brace all the way through. So that was something that was always in the back of his mind. It's very heavy shoes, Andy. Novak's shoes weigh around 200 grams, I believe. Andy's are about 500 each. That's a kilo. And again, that sort of heavyweight shoe that he has to kind of give him the support that he feels that he needs. He tried lighter shoes, just he felt as though he didn't have the stability. I think also stops you sliding as well on the court. Andy was strong enough to get out into the perimeter of the court and sink low. The backhand, he could, obviously pinpoint it in terms of line cross, fast, cross, low. His ability to slice at the right pace to be able to spin round. We saw how often he'd hit it, spin the, with his back to the court, come back in a court. He was quick enough to be able to defend without having to slide. I think if you ask him, he would have loved to have been able to slide. I think he feels that it is a huge advantage on a hard court to be able to slide for your recovery. You don't have to take one extra step to be able to get back into the court. So I think that, in all honesty, if you can learn to slide, if I was teaching a player, I would spend time getting them to be able to learn how to slide. I think it is a huge advantage on a hard court.
Yeah, the recovery, right? So you're able to come out of the corner quicker. You're able to get to the middle faster. I think what Andy did so well, though, and you kind of got into it a little bit, is ultimately the most important part of defending is hit a good ball. Hit a ball that is going to neutralize the rally, whether it's deep or it's low and short, put in an awkward position. And I think Andy was able to probably make up for maybe that extra half step of recovery by just hitting great balls out of the corner. And we saw sometimes with the slice on the backhand, but even with how strong that left hand was, so good at driving the ball with his open stance two-handed backhand, even when he wasn't sliding. And I think that's how I would almost comfort any player who isn't a slider. As long as you can hit a really good ball out of the corner, you're probably going to be okay. So I'm going to go to another comment that also relates to the defense. It's from Anthony's Tennis Hub. How important and crucial was Murray's well-known high tennis IQ and anticipation for his monstrous success? In your opinion, how good would Murray have been had he had all of the skills and shots, but the IQ and the anticipation skills of an average top 50 player? This was something always watching Andy. It was incredible because, yes, I think if you put him tell me if you agree, Petch, if you put him in a combine setting, you said run 40 yards, do the 3-cone drill, he'd be quick, but not quite what he was on a tennis court. And it seems like he was always leaning the right direction when he was being attacked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes from obviously the way that he played as a teenager. I think that he obviously learned how to defend. We talk a little bit about that in the UK about Jack Draper. Jack was a pretty small guy up until his late teens. He grew late. You look at him now and you think, wow, he must have been an attacking player as a teenager. He was actually very defensive, which is why he has the skills that he does at the back of the court, which is what's allowed him to move up the rankings so fast. Gill, another great question. And again, there's kind of a couple of answers to it. Andy's IQ is off the charts. I think that if you speak to the great champions of the past, they'd probably put him in the top 5 of people that understand the game in terms of where to put a ball, pace of shot, shape of shot. Obviously a full tool set in terms of being able to use the slice to bring people in on his terms. All of those things. That on the flip side of that, because there is generally a flip side, there is part of me that wonders if he hadn't have been as good as that, whether the need to accelerate trying to have a bigger forehand would have come earlier, because he was so incredible at turning, losing situations or beating people through tactics rather than just going straight through them, that actually you can argue that potentially it was a slight, you're talking deficit because he is, kind of 17 majors behind the guys that he was chasing, and he was in the mix. And it's not a knock, because that's going to say, oh, that's unbelievably negative. I'm not being negative. I'm just saying, if you're asking me this question and you're asking me why there is this disparity in terms of majors, possibly if he hadn't have been so incredible in terms of his knowledge and his ability to know where people were going to go, and his instincts on the return and being able to return around H 145 and not over guess and all of these things, would he have been in a better place? Because it would have been like, well, I don't have all of that. I don't have that incredible, extraordinary anticipation, and therefore I can't rely on that. So I've got to make my strokes better. I am of the opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, but tennis is an incredibly complicated sport. And the one way you can make it easier is just be better than your opponent. It's just not have to worry about the galaxy of data. The do they serve 72% of the time out wide on the outside on a break point? Do they serve 61% of the time into, be better. If you can be better than 95% of the top 100, well, every time you step on a court, it's a lot easier to play this game and it's a lot less stressful. And that's my philosophy. My philosophy is take care of your side of the net, be the best that you can be, and hopefully you don't have to worry too much about what's going on down the other end.
The why of it is kind of what you're getting at here, because I've been getting comments and wondering myself for years, why is it more difficult for Andy to adapt compared to Novak, who doesn't even resemble his former self at this point, Rafa, who doesn't resemble his former self at this point, Federer maybe a little less extreme, but it happened with him here. And what you're saying is sometimes a strength can be a crutch because you lean on the strength.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always forget the phrase. I wish I was brighter than I am. And there's kind of a phrase that basically in life, if you're living in in an apartment and it's okay, the apartment occasionally runs out of electricity, but not often enough so that your fridge defrosts. That you got a bit of mold in the bedroom, but it's not horrific mold. And basically it's a bit noisy. You got a job that you don't love, but it pays okay and it pays the rent, and you've got a bit of free cash to go out with your mates occasionally, but you don't love your boss. You'd actually be in a better place if you were much worse off. If the apartment was full of moss, your fridge never worked, you hated your job, you couldn't pay the bills, because it would motivate you to therefore go out and actually change everything and
Yeah.
go in a totally different direction. And of course, I'm not saying that because you're looking back at a Hall of Fame career in terms of what Andy's achieved. But my point is, when things are very good as they were, because you just need to look at his record and it stacks up to Olympic golds and wins against all the big four and tick, 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 tick. But obviously, from a point of view as a coach, and that's what you've got me on here for today,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
you your job is to try and, obviously squeeze that gap between that and what you see as coming as the rivals. It's the job of all the coaches on the men's tour right now is how are we going to keep close to Carlos and Yannick? How do we make
Right.
our players be close? Daniel Medvedev is an unbelievable. He was one set away from winning in Australia. But if you don't make his volleying game better, he's probably going to get surpassed by substantial majors by both
Yes.
Yannick and Carlos. So, that is the job for Gilles Savard, is to try and go, listen, your nuts and bolts of your game are awesome, but we are going to have to try and stay in these guys' zip code. How do we do that?
Yeah, let's push for that next thing. I think people are going to appreciate the way that we're framing the conversation in general. I want to go to the top liked comment. Got 30 likes from VTech, and there's two questions here. Let's start with number 2 because it's sort of on topic, and it asks very straight up: if you could significantly improve only one part of Murray's game, what would it be?
I mean, it would have been his forehand,
Yeah.
and more about his footwork, not his actual stroke. I think the stroke itself was excellent. I think at times Andy's footwork especially the one on the down the line, probably wasn't the spacing wasn't quite as you would like to see it. If you looked at one considerable difference between peak Wawrinka and peak Andy, the forehand down the line was just unreal when Stan was on. The French Open final against Novak was just prime example of a shot that won him a Grand Slam. I wouldn't really change his cross court forehand, but if there was one shot that I wished I would have had more time to have tried to have helped him with, it would have been that.
Yeah, I would have answered, or I would answer, flattening out the forehand and trying to just make it more damaging. And I think somebody asks about the Djokovic Murray head to head. I know that's a comment in here. And what's the separator there? And I think if you look at the big three, there's an argument to be made that Djokovic was Andy's most competitive head-to-head against a member of the big three, especially if you take out that initial phase against Federer where Andy started 6-2. Because if you look at a lot of the triumphs for Murray, the largest triumphs of his career, of course, two major finals against Novak, won Rome in a final against Novak, won the year-end championship in 2016 to finish year-end number one against Novak. But then I think more largely, and there were a lot of major finals where Djokovic got the better of it, I feel like head to head, they matched up quite evenly in so many areas. Forehand would probably be the one where I'd say Djokovic in a neutral cross court rally, he's going to be the one that does the initial damage more often than not.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I mean, I think that, Novak was definitely more willing to take more risk on his second serve at times.
Yeah.
Andy's numbers behind his second serve were very good. But he was living unfortunately for him in the 1% territory. If he could
Mm-hmm.
improve something 1%, it was going to make a massive difference against his great rivals. The rest of his game was good enough to beat everybody else. But I think that, if you look at the way that Novak changed things with big second serves on break point down on the ad side in particular, he gave people something to think about. That wasn't something that Andy was willing to buy into because obviously he believes that he could beat people and they would miss before he would. And in general, he was absolutely spot on. He was not wrong. So, but the forehand, absolutely. They're two totally different forehands. In all honesty, I mean, and that's what's made Novak the greatest player of this generation. I mean, you can talk about the movement and all of that, and the mental strength and the willingness to do the diet, but his forehand has arguably been one of the most underrated, great shots that the game's ever seen.
Totally agree. Number one in the two-part question from VTech, is it true that Murray destroyed his hip while chasing the year-end number one spot in 2016, or was the injury always going to happen? Essentially, could he have protected his body better?
No, couldn't have protected it better. It was managed absolutely magnificently by Andy and the team and the physios and the fitness people. They were very well aware of what was going on, and no finger blaming there at
Yeah.
all. It was just something that unfortunately he was living with, and it came at the back end of there. But there was no time frame in terms of there was a known time frame of when it potentially was going to happen, but he did everything he could to extend his career the best he could.
Yeah, I mean, 2013 is when it first popped up, and there was a retirement in Queens with the hip. So I think look, you could say, were you playing through pain for 2 years, and was that a good idea? But in reality, how realistic is it for somebody with pain that is not completely debilitating to stop when you're going for world number one? So, you might
It
have,
didn't make any difference. Like
yeah,
that year, the incredible end of 2016 made, you know, it didn't. They did an incredible job. Andy did an
sure.
incredible job on the rehab every single day of his life to maximize the longevity of his body. The guys around him all did an incredible job to maximize it. And ultimately it was what it was. I think it's you've got to just know your body, and you've got to know its limitations, and people need to be very aware when they go off to academies around the world that it's very important for particularly young kids to make sure that they don't overtrain at a young age. That isn't what happened with Andy, by the way.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you are going to go, you just need to be very well aware of your potential structural weaknesses, that you don't necessarily stress them out at too young an age, and having MRIs and having a very holistic approach to everything that's going on with your body is super crucial for some of these juniors.
Yeah. And maybe this is another example of the big three skewing our expectations, right? I mean, Andy playing this monstrously physical style, had this injury, the hip, if you kind of say second half of 2017. How old was he? Around 30 at that time?
Yeah, he must. Yes, he must have been around 30. Yes,
Right. So, I mean, pre
it
big
was a
three
great
era.
effort. Listen, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's been awesome to watch. I mean, obviously there's so many things. Science has got better. Um, you travel in a better class because you're making more money. I was seeing today because we obviously got the big chat conversations about schedule and is there too much tennis, not enough tennis. I saw someone like Laszlo Jerry, he's like outside 110 and he's picked up over half a million, US dollars this year. So people are making money that allows you to at least travel in a better way because obviously it's an incredibly tough global sport in terms of jumping on planes and getting everywhere, being able to pay for a physio, whether that's not necessarily just on the road, but certainly when you come back to base. That was even tough for us back in the 80s and 90s to kind of make enough money to go and do that. So, things and diet and everything has just changed so that we've got an opportunity to see these great champs out there for longer.
Yeah. Nobody asked about this, but I want to jump in here and talk about just the post hip phase and what you got out of it as someone, covering tennis and also just as an your inner Andy Murray fan. I felt like it was an embodiment of his fighting spirit and his never quit attitude. And personally, I'm really glad we got that post hip resurfacing phase, even if it wasn't as fruitful as Andy was hoping that it would be at certain points in time.
Well, yeah, it goes back to your definition of success, doesn't it? If we're always going to just define success because you pick up something shiny at the end of it, then pretty much most people's careers aren't a success. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, that's not how I define it. And that's not how, I mean, obviously, from Andy having won so much in his mind, that would have been validation, more trophies that would have made it worth it. But I agree with you. What what these great champions have, and which Andy has, is a deep obsession for the sport, and that's their greatest strength. They can wake up every single day with jet lag, tired, but they love the game so much they'll put all of the things that potentially could creep in to their performances and make it a problem, and just put it to one side and get out there and put their best tennis on the court on that given day. And and that's what we saw. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to have wrapped up at that particular stage, and ridden off into the sunset. Kept his body in a half decent shape. I mean, the amount of injections and time and effort and rehab, and I mean, mind numbing to the human, the mortal human being that he went through to put his body in a place where he could compete, still against the very best, which he was able to do, even with everything that he'd gone through, was inspirational. And I had that little period for 4 months when he was in a pretty bad place back in 2021. And it was inspirational to be. And I sent him a message after Wimbledon, saying that I was like, take everything that's happened between us, and and everything else. The one thing that he's done for me is that he's driven me to try and be the best that I can be, not just from my tennis commentator's point of view, or if I was coaching, but just my life. Like, to see him with the millions of dollars that he has and the lifestyle he has and a beautiful wife and 4 kids, and the world is his oyster, and yet still willing to get up at those times and grind himself into the stone to become, like, just to find that extra little bit of percent to become better than he was the day before. If you're around that, you stop feeling sorry for yourself. You start like, hey, listen, if this guy can be bothered to do that, I need to do that. So it pushes it into all of your walks of life, that you think to yourself, I can be better at that. I can be better at that. Stop moaning about it, and actually just go and do some growth and get better. Because if he's willing to do it for something that he's already achieved everything and more than he thought he was going to do. And that's what I took out of it, and I think that's the beautiful thing, Gil, that we sit here today. I'm not going to tell your viewers what they should take out of Andy's, post hit resurfacing, but
Mm-hmm.
what they should take away from it is something that they can implement into their own lives and go, you know what, I'm going to use that as inspiration to become the best part of my life, which is where I'm perhaps not being as great as I could be.
Yeah, so well said. It's something that I would say tennis taught me hard work,
Yep.
both training and watching, and like I looked at guys like Murray and Ferrer at times and others, and you can see the pain tolerance and the sacrifices that are there. A lot of the sacrifices you don't see, unfortunately, but a lot of it you do. And for Andy, I mean, it was so crystal clear at that point in his career how much he was putting into it. All right, this next one a little bit lighter. It comes from Tehran. Did Murray have the best lob of all time? That's it. That's the question. Short and sweet.
uh, yeah, I mean, it's got to be close, right? It's got to be close. I would love to have seen him and Leighton at their peaks.
Yeah,
I
that's what
think,
that's who I was going to bring up.
yeah, I mean, I had the misfortune of playing Leighton when he was 15 years and he cuffed me down in Australian last round of qualies. His lob was at the best of skies of all time, and he never missed it. Um, I, is it? Yeah, I would put both of those two in the same category, to be honest.
Yeah, and both of them preferred the backhand lob, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. And but they both, to be fair, decent forehand ones. You remember more of the backhand ones, but I promise you wouldn't have to go far on YouTube to find a couple of nice forehand ones.
No doubt. No doubt. Okay, there's three more that I feel like we got to get to because they're good. I like this one from member Lindsay, and you can hit the join button to become a member, contribute to the channel. Much appreciated, and I try to give you some priority on the mailbags. Question from Lindsay is: Was Andy successful because of or despite his negative self-talk on court? In other words, did yelling at himself accomplish anything, or was it just a deeply ingrained habit that was too hard to shake? Maybe there's some other explanation. Thanks so much.
Again, give credit to Andy. He definitely tried to work on this. Definitely spent time with sports psychologists trying to work on this side of things. He saw the upside and the downside. The reality is, when he was quiet on the court, it just didn't help him. He lost the fire. You've got to find this optimum performance state. And when he was quiet and not saying anything, it was just like somebody had stuck a reservoir of water on the fire and extinguished it, and he couldn't find a way to be as competitive as he was. So he tried. He tried to be a different way. It didn't work for him, and therefore he had to, operate in the way that he did. It was a great strength. He pulled him out of a lot of situations which seemingly you thought he was going to lose, and that fire, that rage, the inferno, uh, where he absolutely hated to lose, was the defining factor for him to win those matches. So there was no question that it was a massive plus. But the caveat here is it did take an awful lot out of him emotionally and it was possibly in those situations a little bit more often than he would have liked to have been. And obviously, as you run through a fortnight at a major, those things, those 0.5%, not even a full percent, can really make the difference when you're taking on Novak over 5 hours or Rafa, all of those things. It was always the one thing that I felt was probably going to be against those guys a strength and a weakness. I think at times it was a
Yeah.
massive strength because when he lost to them, he dug even deeper to try and figure out a way to beat them the next time, and that desire, that hatred of losing, was a huge motivating factor. But I don't think I don't think the numbers lie. I don't Novak did it, but it seemed to like go a lot quicker when he kind of vented at his box. And Andy's was a bit more sustained, and
Yeah.
I think it probably, in reflection, ended up hurting him against the absolute elite. But he couldn't be any way, and unfortunately, you've got to work with what you're given.
I like the point about the energy burn. However, I also like to look at what's happening during the points. I'm sure you're with me on this. It can be sometimes frustrating to see certain discourse on what's happening between the points when you then lose sight of how a player is actually reacting once it's play ball. And you do see sometimes players will yap at their box, vent that frustration. And then on the next point, you'll see a frustration, low percentage attempt at a forehand. And it's like, well, that was an emotional shot and you missed it because you didn't have composure. And that's one thing. You never really saw that from Andy. You didn't see a lot of lapses in focus. You didn't see him lose his decision making when he was frustrated. He was in it. Now, I think in the later years, I do think there was some crisis of confidence stuff where he maybe got so hard on himself that he kind of lost belief. But I didn't see that much in his prime. So I like to, more focus on what's happening during the points where I think Andy was pretty rock solid mentally and emotionally, no matter what was happening.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It was more the energy burn for me,
Yeah.
and it was more it's more the constant telling yourself, even if he's not really conscious of it, that things aren't as good as he would like it to be. I think a real skill for these great players, Gill, that we don't give them credit for is that they know how well they can play. They know the standards that they expect of themselves. They know how accurate they can be, and their ability to not hit those peaks and yet still sustain a very optimistic outlook in those matches is an underrated quality that they have. Because I know from my own personal playing experience, I was never at that quality in terms of but my expectations of what I thought was my best level when I wasn't making it was incredibly frustrating and disappointing to me. And I don't think I handled that particularly well. So when I watch people like Andy and Novak and Rafa and Roger, and we know when we've seen them play absolutely flawless tennis and they don't hit those kind of that kind of standard, the fact that they're still able to push it to one side and say, well, this is what I've got on this day, I'm going to win with it anyway, is a really, really strong quality. And the other thing that Andy's sort of personality did, he's the best killer of dead air on the tennis court of all time. Let's be honest. His matches were as fun as anyone else's out there. It was pure theater.
Yeah, him and Serena were kind of the champions of uh, allowing the commentators to lay out, and
Yes.
yeah, kind of took care of itself. All right, next one from Rolitos, and this is from my Discord. Link is in the description. Hi, Gill and Mark. This question is you're gonna love this one, Petch. This question is not just related to Andy, but British tennis in general. Compared to the other Grand Slam nations, GB is really underperforming both on women's and men's side when it comes to producing a crop of talents. You only see most British players at Wimbledon receiving wild cards and then disappearing from the tour until the next Wimbledon. For a long time, Andy was the only British top 100 player on the men's side. Currently, only Draper and Norrie sit in the top 10, whereas France, the US, Australia all have around 10 players. Considering a lot of money flows from Wimbledon to the LTA, funding should not be a problem for player development. Why do you think GB is lagging behind? And in what area could the LTA do better? Thanks very much. Let's first go with the premise, Petch. Is that a fair premise?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not punching at the weight that it should do. Listen, I was there for 18 months. I ran the men's performance department. I was kind of how I first came across Judy and Andy. I was and I've never changed my mind, a big believer that the federation is there to facilitate, not to produce. Facilitation includes more tournaments. I got rid of my performance budget. Apart from Andy, I virtually didn't individually fund anybody. We put on 20, 25 futures. I think we put on 4 or 5 challenges, got some extra money, used the money that I had in my budget. My goal was to run that for 20 years because that's, for me, a cycle. Everyone wants to see it happen in like 3 to 5. It's ridiculous. You need the next crop of kids who haven't even been born yet to run one cycle. 18 years old. Let's see where we are at 18 and see what that looks like. Unfortunately, I didn't stay there that long. The tournaments were kicked off 18 months after I left for somebody's wisdom. And we plowed way too much money into a national tennis center that is fantastic for the people that are there. So if you've got people that are sitting there they'll say that British tennis is in the best place possible and everything else, but access is pretty elite, and it's difficult to get there. So yes, you've got some good people there, but it's also sadly, it's very much, unless you've also almost made it, then you're not going to get there. So I find that quite tricky. I was always a big voice in the National Tennis Centre. Was the last piece of the puzzle, not the first. We need to get the participation up, and then that will cycle into the performance side of things. You look at all the players that are out there, how many people, Navoni, his uncle played, his mum played. We need parents playing. We need these parents playing, because they'll eventually have kids, and then hopefully those kids can become the players. So that was one bit that I still think we're far behind. I believe that we should have sent our kids at 18 to Spain or America or south of France, to the academies that are already doing it. I just felt like you want to play outside, right? And most of tennis is played outside. Yes, you got retractable roofs, but the four majors are outside. We spend an awful lot of time indoors in the UK. I don't think that helps our style of tennis. So I think that is also a bit of a miss from our point of view. And I think the coaching is pretty bang average in the UK, if I'm being honest. And I think that is a problem. There are some excellent people, and that is not a general sort of like scattergun shot. But I think in general, I think we are not particularly great in that department. I feel like a lot of the qualifications are box ticking exercises, and I think it could do with an overhaul in that regard. And this is not. Whenever you say stuff like this, at times it tends to get taken a bit personally. I hope it doesn't. I've always wanted the best for British tennis. I'm out of British tennis. I have very little to do, if almost nothing. I coach at home for a British holiday company, which I absolutely love. I want the best for British tennis, and I do think we should take stock of where we're at and have a look at how we can do things a little bit better, because I think as a nation, we should be doing a little bit better on the tennis front.
You were kind of hoping for the Italy approach of facilitating as much tournament play as possible, futures and lower level events, right?
Yeah, and the economic benefit from that as well, Gil, is the clubs thrive. You put a tournament in there, you got food and beverage, you've got a stringer that potentially, is going to make some money that week, because he's actually not stringing rackets very much anymore. So that ends up becoming a bit of a boon to him for that week. You've obviously got the upside of any kids that you do have at the club seeing some elite level tennis, which is, just awesome. You can't, all of us that love this game started somewhere watching great players play, or ball boying, ball girling. You want to get close. Wow, this is an amazing sport. That's so good. The further you get away from it, the further your distance for it, or the further it's just on your TV, it just makes it look unattainable. So the more that it's actually there in your club, obviously has a positive effect on those kids. It has a positive effect on the economics of the country, gives them a bit of a lifeline. They're not it's a struggle running a tennis club, especially at the moment. You've got paddle and pickle putting a huge amount of pressure, which ultimately may end up actually being a lifeline for these tennis clubs. It may be that they become a nice economic generator, and you can kind of smooth that around through the tennis. But I am a very big fan of. I was looking at it yesterday. I was on Tennis Channel, and I was talking about Italy. I think it was in 1990. They basically had 6 challenger events. They then, I think it was, so that was 1990. I think by 2010 they had 28, and it's a similar mirror image of the futures. So you've got a thriving club scene, tons of tournaments. People are loving it. You go to anything in Italy, but they also invest very heavily in their coach education program. And so, it's not the magic elixir, but there has not been one argument that's been made to me that tells me that it would be something that would be a negative.
Yeah. No, that resonates. I was also going to bring up the whole indoor thing. I think that's a big deal. And in the United States, there are look, all the players are from California and Florida. And if you're not from one of those places, you move to one of those places. There are no indoor courts there. However, you could also make an argument that the fact that it's all hard courts hurts American tennis. So it's very interesting stuff to look at. Last one comes from Tennis Sounds. Hey, Gil, from the current generation of players, who would you say has the most similarities to Murray in today's tennis? I really can't think of anyone who has a similar game style, technically, tactically, and movement. Curious about your take. So, Tennis Sounds wants to know who resembles Murray nowadays. And I think there's a larger philosophical question to be had there, or discussion to be had.
Oh, Gil, that's a great question. Um, wow.
So I guess what are the
I'm getting
things
my
that we should
phone
be
out.
thinking
Hold
about?
on.
Okay, we're looking at the rankings.
Yeah, it's a really great question.
I
And
think
because of the fact that I'm even doing this, obviously,
there are two in the top 20 that I would maybe bring forward,
yeah.
and it would be demeanor and Tommy Paul. No, I don't think. Now Tommy is trying to come forward so much now. I don't know that. I don't know how much I love it, but I'm thinking players who want to use their speed, use their legs, but you know, take the ball when they're attacking. At least take the ball early, redirect, absorb pace. But I don't think there's a very close 1-to-1 with Andy.
No, I wouldn't say there's a very close to one. And I guess that probably is normal, right? I mean, he's been one of the greatest tennis players of all time. And to be one of the greatest tennis players of all time, you kind of have to be pretty unique. You need to have an X factor. You need to have something that no one else has. Because if we could all just reproduce it and you could just, AI it, it would be simple for us as coaches that we could be able just to replicate that. So in many ways, it is. It's a great discussion at the moment, and my argument, like at Laver Cup, the most successful people that I felt on a very slow, court at Laver Cup are the ones that actually came in. And it seems so counterintuitive to, oh no, we've got slow court. Let's stay at the back. Everyone was saying Medvedev was going to win because the ball was staying low. He's got flat shots. But if you can't
Mm-hmm.
finish from the back of the court because it's so slow, the only other place you can finish on tennis court is at the net. So if you don't make that part of your game proficient, you're in trouble. So, I think, look at Yannick now finishing so much better than him. I know we've made a big deal of his serve, but look how often he comes in and finishes the net and looks super comfortable. Carlos, obviously. So for me, the game is it's not flipping on its head. It can't do because the courts are too slow. You're still going to get past too often. But you better make sure that you finish well at the net. Otherwise, you're in all sorts of trouble. But no, Andy was a prototype, and I think there isn't anyone that I can think of that plays similarly to him.
Another thing is, I look at the youth. They are mostly nowadays pace generators, crazy, violent racket speed, pace generators, and very few embrace neutrality to the extent that Murray embraced neutrality. Just even when I look at the young guys, and I'll ask you actually to look at, because I know you have it pulled up. Look at the draft that Gruskin and I did of the top players 23 and under. To me, there are very few players in there who don't have big, heavy racket speed, heavy RPM forehands, and very few who I think would say that they like to defend or want to defend. I mean, maybe at the end of Gruskin's draft, you got a guy like Dino Prismic, but
Yeah,
very rare.
and the reason for that is that Andy used technology that's 20 years old.
Right.
In a nutshell, if you were looking at it, it's that's why Andy played the way that he did. That racket, you better flush it out of the middle of the court to maximize the pace that you can get because you have no additional sweet spot for it. That I'm talking the head, not the onyx. And so, so from that point of view, that was kind of why he embraced neutrality because actually, from a racket point of view, out on the extremities of the court, on the perimeters, you've got to come up with something unbelievable. Whereas, as you say, what we're seeing right now with the lighter rackets and obviously the bigger head sizes is guys that can just take monster cuts at the ball, and not miss. So that side of thing, I think, is an interesting one for the authorities. It's like, where do you draw the line? How much of this do we want to see consistently, and how much do we want to try and figure out a way to give other players an opportunity to still be super competitive if they want to play a different style? So those are kind of long reaching sort of questions that I have. But yeah, the reality is that Andy kind of had to play that way because that racket gave him very little ability, just from a neutral situation, to generate the kind of pace that he needed just to go right through players.
I can't resist asking you this to end it. Is there anyone who myself or Gruskin should have picked higher? Is there a snub there? Someone who we let drop a little too low? Someone who we picked too high?
Yeah, it's a really. I've been looking at it, and I think you guys are. I mean, I think you guys have pretty much nailed it. I want to say that Artikazo, maybe I would have dropped him a little bit further down at the moment. Medjedovic, footwork at the moment isn't looking sweet, which is a surprise given obviously who his idol is and everything else. You kind of feel as though he should be he should be a little bit better in that department. I probably would put Lehechka above Kaboli. Personally, I'm very high on him. He's obviously got low margins, but I kind of feel you better bring something to a matchup with Carlos or Yannick that's going to hurt you. And I think he's got a little bit more in his game. And again, on probably the one thing that's beautiful, Gil, about this sport that we love is like somebody like Jerry Shang. I was doing something the other day for somebody, and they were like, "Who are you going to pick?" And I went with sort of Yao Fonseca, and I was like, "Oh, and Jerry Shang. Oh, I'm just not sure." If he's got enough, and then he's got that intangible that we saw last week, and it's not just the fact that he won; it was the way that he won. The forehand down the line. It's one of those ones where you're like, "Wow, that's risky." Not for him; he doesn't miss it. So, yeah. And I guess there'll be periods in the year where he does miss it, but he's got that intangible that made me kind of sort of realize that I better not be too low on him. He's got something about him that's just a little bit special. The time on the ball is always something you're looking for, but he's got a way of hurting people. And the serve looks better than it was, and it can surely only get better. No, you guys did a great job on your pick. So
thank you.
Fully agree.
We'll take it. Yeah, Jerry Shang. I mean, you're right though. Things change so fast. I'm sure he wouldn't have dropped that low if we did the draft this week, but we did it last week.
Yeah. No, and
it's incredible.
It's not that he's low. I mean, it's not that he's low.
No, he's not. No.
You got him behind Analdi. Artifice absolutely like right up there. You got Holger. It's incredible that Holger's still in this kind of mix, isn't it? From that point of view, learn a team who's done great. Brandon Nakashima, what a shout out to him as well. I love those kind of stories. I don't care that that you were good and you were good, but when you fall back into the doldrums, which he had done outside the world's top 100 and things, it is not easy to pick yourself up and have 12 months like he has. And massive credit to Brandon. That's a season that he can be proud of. Whether he pulled the pin on it today, that's amazing turnaround, and credit to him.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite players to watch in person at the U.S. Open. I mean, he was playing sweet stuff throughout that tournament. The match against Musetti might have been my favorite match that I watched all event long. That was awesome.
Yes,
this has been awesome as well, Petch. I mean, I think this was so much fun, and I'm glad we got the in-depth discussion in on Andy. We could have gone even longer as always, but it was really a pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure to have me on. Thanks. And yeah, love talking tennis, love talking to you, and continue great things with your mailbag, your pod, and everything else. You do an amazing job for tennis. We need to sell it, and you sell it in a great way.
Thank you.